I'm Sister Miriam Duggan. I'm a Franciscan missionary sister for Africa. I was born in Limerick and I entered with the Franciscan missionary sisters in 1956. I came to know about them. They had a film More Than I Can, and they showed it in Limerick at one stage. And I can remember going home that night and thinking, gosh, I couldn't, but I'd love to, right? And then I kind of put it out of my head for a while, and the whole thing was kind of at me. So I went to see a priest friend and talked to him, and so he guided me, and I ended up saying, okay, let me try it. They'll probably send me home after a week, but I'm still there after 60 years. We were still attached to the Abbey, and under the Abbey the sisters were. But as the years went by, the Abbey weren't able to keep supplying sisters, and also the constitution of the Abbey, which was more a contemplative order, was not suitable for the life they had to live in Africa. Like, say, the sister didn't go outside the enclosure. Well, there were no walls, there were no enclosures to go outside, but lots of the things just didn't suit a missionary congregation. And then Mother Kevina got permission to open a house in England in Home Hall, and one in Ireland in 1935 for vocations specifically for Africa. And that took off very successfully. And in those days there were many vocations from Ireland for the missions, and they ended up in coming out, and there was a kind of a big boom of sisters, and a lot of spread throughout Uganda and then into Kenya and later to Zambia and South Africa. We didn't get a complete separation until 1954. I was in the novitiate, and usually after novitiate we went to do training, and I was supposed to be doing domestic science because I loved domestic science, and then they were looking for doctors because at that time there was the Mau Mau trouble in Kenya, and some late doctors we'd had out had to leave because they had families and they went home. So an SOS came back from Africa saying, please send sisters on to do medicine. So I happened to have Latin in my leaving cert, and I had done my the other exam. You do the one for entrance to university, matric, and so I ended up being asked to know would I do medicine, and my first reaction was, gosh, I'd never thought of it before in my life, and all I could think of was blood and vomit and everything else. But having prayed about it, I said, well, let me try it and do it, and I grew to love it. I went to England then to do my internship because I had gone over there during the summer, one summer holiday, because we as medical students were encouraged to go to and work in some hospital, and I had gone with another person over to Wolverhampton. And I saw it was a very busy hospital, a lot of trauma, because it was an industrial area. And I saw the volume of work there that was being done, and the amount of work that the junior doctors did. So I decided, let me go there and get more equipped for Africa. So I did my internship there, and then I was thinking I'd be coming out to Africa when they said, would you mind going on and doing a specialisation in obstetrics and gynecology, because they wanted to upgrade the training school at Nsambia Hospital, and they needed a resident FRCOG at that time. I went to Birmingham for an interview to get in there, and when I saw the crowd there, I thought there was no hope of getting in here. There were people from London, different places. But when I went into the interview, they asked me why did I want to do it, why did I want to, and in the beginning it was to do the diploma course, and I said because I was going to Africa. And what I didn't know was one of the main interviewers on the board there had been in Africa, and he said that I would love to give you a chance to train because I know the need in Africa. So it was God at work again, and they offered me the job straight away. I was there for three more years. After that, then I was appointed to Uganda, to Nsambia Hospital there in 1969. I must say I fell in love with the country straight away, and the people. They're very courteous people and kind people. And I loved the challenge in the hospital. You didn't have too many idle moments, but you really were put to a test in many cases that you would not see in Europe now, because you would get ruptured wombs in, you'd get people who'd been in labour for days and days and days and obstructed. So it was very challenging in that way. I would say it was the busiest missionary maternity hospital in Kampala. Maybe the government place was more busy. My first impression was, gosh, I don't have a battery of doctors around me when I'm doing something. If I'm doing surgery, I don't have another doctor with me. And you depended on nurses to assist you, and you had an assistant anaesthetist, not a doctor qualified anaesthetist. So you had a much more bigger responsibility. That was the first thing I kind of remember, that you didn't have the same backup that I would have had at home and during the training. And but one of the things that really struck me too was the joy that the Ugandan people celebrated when there was a newborn baby. They used to say that their wealth was their children. The nurses, who were very well trained and very experienced, they would do all the normal deliveries. I would only get up for the complicated deliveries. So there was a lot of joy in working with them. Equally, there were lots of very difficult cases, and that I wouldn't have experienced. I never saw a ruptured womb in all my years in Ireland, in England, but at the first week I was in Uganda, I did see one. Mother Kevina, she entered in the Abbey, in the Mill Hill Abbey in London, and she was professed there, and she was working there. And then Bishop Hanlon came. It was a Mill Hill bishop. The Mill Hill fathers had come to Uganda some years previous to that, and they decided that they wanted to have some sisters to help them. So he came pleading for sisters, and so a group of 6 of them were appointed to come out, and Mother Kevina was one of those. And they left they left London, came by boat to Holland, then down to the Red Sea, down to Mombasa, and they came on the lunatic train, which it was called at the time. It was the first train that made the journey over the escarpment. The 2 previous ones had stalled. And even when they were going over the escarpment, they had to stand on the outboard of the train in case it keeled over. They arrived then in Kisumu, and then they went by boat and small boat across the lake to Uganda, and landed at Munyonyo, which is about 12 miles outside Kampala, and they walked the rest of the way into Kampala. This was 1903. When Mother Kevina went to Uganda first, leprosy was very prevalent, and she actually set up 2 leprosariums in Uganda, and one in Baluba and one in Yenga. And a lot of the research work around leprosy was done at the main hospital at Baluba. She is very much a household name, and even her name has gone into the culture, if you like, because during the wartime, when the Ugandan soldiers were surrounded in Burma by the enemy, they used to drop food into them to help them to eat and to feed them. And they began to say, the Kevinas are coming. And so the Kevinas became known as to do a good deed. So now in Uganda, to do a good deed, go and do a Kevina is to go and do a good deed. So it's kind of into the language, even her name has gone, you know. The time when she was buried it was Cardinal Cushing actually flew her body to Ireland for burial, because normally we get buried where we die. And so it was then her body was flown to Ireland and buried. But then it was the people of Uganda and the chiefs that collected the money in order to bring her body back to Uganda. They really pressurized, and they said they will cover all the cost, and did cover all the cost. Well, it's kind of been talked about for several years, but nothing seriously done about it. And then a few years ago, people themselves in Uganda were requesting that she should be made a saint, and they were already canonizing her themselves and going to her grave and praying there. And so then the Little Sisters took up the cause. That's the order that she founded, the local order that she founded, the Little Sisters of St. Francis. And then we joined in with them, and so last 2 years ago she was declared Servant of God at a ceremony in Rubaga Cathedral. And then that was the beginning then of the diocesan, what they call the diocesan phase, where you had to look into all the places where she was, all the things written about her, all the letters that she ever wrote. So you had to go back through archives wherever she was, and to get all the information you could, and then to compile it and index it and verify it. And so we finished that just last month, and we had the closing of the diocesan phase in Lugazi Cathedral. It's all in Uganda because it's been promoted through Bishop Kakoza in Uganda. But all the bishops in Ireland know about it. In the early days there was, because Mother Kevina herself had tried to train to learn midwifery, and she had appealed in Dublin to do it, and she wasn't allowed to do it. And then she got a place in France, where it was sort of an assistant midwife program. And just before she did the exam, she was recalled and told that she wasn't to continue. But you know, God has his own ways, because she was in Dublin and she went into the Poor Clare convent and asked the Poor Clares for prayers. And while she was waiting to see the abbess there, a young lady came in, and she was a doctor just qualified, and they got talking. And that doctor came out to Uganda and helped her to start the first midwifery training school. When the time I was medical superintendent in Uganda, the AIDS pandemic broke out, and it really hit Uganda, because during all those years leading up, we were so busy coping with the war that we didn't realize that there was AIDS in the country. That was something that was over in America, but it had nothing to do with us. And people who came in looking gaunt and thin, which put it down to not having enough food to eat and all the rest, but we didn't realize. And after the war, when we got our first testing machine, when we were first able to test, we found that there was 17% of the population that we tested were HIV positive, which was a huge amount, and it very quickly even rose again after that, which meant that nearly every fourth adult that you met going down the road, you could say, was nearly positive. Well, the hospital got so busy with people very sick, coming in dying, we couldn't cope. That we hadn't enough beds, and there were people everywhere on the floor, in the bed. And so then we started a home-based care program, where we had teams that would go out to the homes, teach the people how to look after somebody with AIDS, how to nurse them, how to care for them, and we would bring the medicines. And that grew and grew very much, and so the only ones that we brought into the hospital then were the ones that couldn't be managed at home, because it's a chronic illness, really. It takes years. And so then when we had it took a big stress off the hospital, because at one stage you could get nothing else into the hospital except AIDS patients, because there were no beds. And but having done that, it made you realize that the challenges that were out there. And I can remember one day sitting on the bed of a young man who was dying, and trying to console him, and he was very stressed, and I just thought, gosh, this disease is preventable. Why should people be suffering like this? And that's what got me into the prevention. And while at the time people were promoting condoms, I said, no, that isn't the answer. It might reduce the risk, but it's not the answer. What we need to do is to look at the behaviour that's spreading the disease. And that was unfaithfulness in marriage and sex before marriage. So we started a program. It was actually Sister Kay Lawler started it, and we took it up. It was Education for Life, a behaviour change process. And with groups of students, groups of university students, we ran these programs over 3 or 4 days and really got the message out there. If you really want to stay free from AIDS, this is the only 100% way. And it spread quite rapidly, and we trained teams in different dioceses, and it spread quite rapidly to many parts of Uganda, and it's continuing there actually at the moment as well. We got support from the government in the fact that President Museveni was very much behind it, and you may even remember his famous speech in Florence when he said, "This is why I'm calling my people back to our time-tested culture of no sex before marriage and faithfulness in marriage. Young people need to be taught discipline, self-control, and at times sacrifice." And I thought they were very powerful words coming from a president. Actually, it fell from 25% down to 6%. Now, it took some years, but it did come down right down to that, and even among the youth down to 2%. Unfortunately, recently, there's been a slight rise again, just as there is here in Kenya. Eventually, when we had the program that we started, actually I was in Kamochi at the time, which is a very poor slum outside. I was kind of gradually handing over the obstetrics, and so it was out there that we actually started it. And then we set up an office for it, and people were coming back, like say schools where we had given the program or universities, they're saying we need more, we need some ongoing thing. So we set up clubs called Youth Alive clubs, and had songs that they used to sing, like Youth Alive, it's our motto, lose alive, we'll fight together, so it was kind of stimulating young people together. And so there are several teams now still in Uganda working, and they go around to the various parishes, schools, and keep the fire burning. When I was posted down to South Africa, I started the program down there, and then I started it in Zambia. Another priest I had trained in the program took it to Nigeria, so it spread all over many African countries, even to Mauritius, and we've had a few conferences where the leaders have come together and shared their experiences and what works and what doesn't work. Yes, I was in Uganda, and abortion was illegal there and frowned upon very much. And they had they were rewriting their constitution after the war was finished and over and things had settled down. They were rewriting the constitution, and something kind of, watch what they're going to put in it in the constitution about the protection of life. So when I went to I got a hold of a draft of it, and I saw in it that what was being put in the Constitution was the protection of life from the moment of birth, which leaves it wide open to abortion. And I knew there was outside influence helping them to rewrite the Constitution. So I was going down to the clinic, and this lady came in to me, and she said, "What's wrong with you today, Dr. Duggan? You're looking so glum." And I said, "Well, the truth is that," I said, "I never thought I'd see the day in Uganda when they would be allowing abortion, and because children are so important to them. So she said, and I shared with her what I had read on the newspaper that morning, which had said that Uganda to legalise abortion, you know. That evening, she went home that evening, her husband rang me. He was a pastor of a Pentecostal church, and he said, we need to do something. Now, I'd already been to the Secretariat, and so we decided, I said, you get some of the church leaders from your side, and I'll get some from the Catholic side, and we'll meet together. So we met down in the hotel near the conference centre where the Constitution was still being debated. And so we said, how can we get into the people to share our ideas with? And so we decided that we would invite the 30 most Christian MPs that we could to a luncheon, and we would brief them. So the first thing that happened was when we went down to arrange the lunch, and we hadn't even thought of who was going to pay for it. The man said, why do you want this lunch? And we told him why, and he said, I will do it, and I'll do it free. So 30 of them turned up for the lunch, because it was during the break time from the Constitution. So while they were having their lunch, Dr. Pius and myself briefed them about the abortions, the effect of it, and all the rest. And then for their dessert, we put on the silent scream. And they said, please, we've had enough, we know. And so we said, we want you to go back. We can't go into Parliament, but we want you to go back into Parliament and be a voice for us. So about a week later, I got a call to know if I'd go down and address the Parliament. And those that were rewriting the Constitution. So I didn't want it just to be a European thing, so I brought Dr. Pius with me, and we shared the talk. And so when I had finished, this lady stood up, and she'd obviously been to overseas, and she was very much into feminism and women's rights and all the rest, and the right of the body. And she really stood up and blasted me, and I left her there of her anger. And when she was finished, I just said to her, you know, I'm surprised that you as a woman, and that babies are so important, are advocating for abortion and not protecting it. The one area that you're superior to men is that you can nurture life within your womb, and now you want to throw that away. And all the men in the group stood up and started clapping. And it was changed. It went back into protection of the baby from the moment of conception. And it is still that, even though there's been a few attempts still to get them to change. And this is the sad thing, is that people from other countries try to influence and get them to change their morals. When I was doing my training in Birmingham in 1967, I think it was, they passed the abortion law in England, and it made life quite difficult for me trying to do a postgraduate degree in that. But one of the professors I worked with, he did respect my views. Not that he always wasn't a bit displeased when I said, no, I'm not, or when I walked out of the theatre and said, I can't assist you. And one day he said to me, after I'd walked out of the theatre and we came out after, he said, I suppose in your eyes I'll be going to hell. I said, I don't judge you, but I said, I know I can't do it. And he was very good to me. And even when I was going to Africa, he gave me a whole heap of equipment and stuff. So when I was back on holiday one time, I went back to the hospital where I trained just to see what updates there were. And he had retired. But I went out to his home in Birmingham to visit him. And when he opened the door, his first words of greeting were to me, I wish I had been like you. And I thought he meant that he wished he'd gone to Africa. And he said, come in. And then he shared with me, he said, and he was a top surgeon. He said, I sit here thinking of the babies I destroyed. And there, I felt so sad to think that this man who had saved so many lives, because he was a genius in cancer surgery, was there lamenting the lives that he had taken. You know, so it comes back to people that, you know, you can't take life without it coming back at you some way afterwards. I know they're in a difficult situation, but I would still say to them, stand firm, even though it might cost you a lot. If people criticize you, that's only their opinion, it's not who you are. And if you have your own values, stick by those values and don't let other people influence you to do what is wrong. And for me, somebody going into medical care, whether a doctor or a nurse, it's to save life. It's a contradiction then to take it at the other end. So I would say stand firm and be proud of who you are and for what you're standing for. I would. I don't know. That's a hard one to answer. Maybe there's a few things I might think of doing a wee bit differently, but I have no regrets of doing what I've done, if I'll put it that way, right? I'm very happy in my life, and I think God has blessed me in many ways.